Good morning, everyone. It is lovely to see so many of you joining us today and from all over the place. And I've already seen that some of you are telling us in this chat function where you're from. So I would encourage you to keep doing that so that we get a good sense of the spread of everybody joining. Welcome to the second Buildings Forum webinar, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Frances Breenan. I am Deputy General Secretary for Mission for the United Reformed Church. And the Buildings Forum links to the work of the Mission Committee, which I serve as the Secretary. And so I'm very happy to be involved in this webinar and to co-host it. We will have a main presentation from Martin Hayward, who we will introduce in a minute. We have a few videos telling us what churches have done with their buildings. And I should say that now, when we come to those videos, please have a piece of paper and a pen ready, and we'll tell you nearer the time how you should use those. Shall we start with prayer? Shall we pray? God of life and light, we gather today as your people. We thank you for the blessings that this day has given: health and breath, food and shelter, people we love, and responsibilities you have given us. We are mindful that they are your gifts. As we meet, we ask that your Spirit is with us, that we may hear and learn and share, and delight in all of it. Bless us in our meeting, that we may go from here with new energy and ideas, and strengthened for the work to come. May our work contribute to the bringing of your kingdom, where justice, peace, and compassion will reign. We pray this in the name of Jesus, who leads us on the way and in whose footsteps we follow. Amen. Without further ado, I now hand over to Cliff to give us a recap of the previous conference.
Thank you. We received a lot of feedback from the last conference. We're looking at ways when we can share some of the interesting and positive comments that we got from that conference and from future ones. But just to run through some of the concerns that were raised, which again, we are looking at and trying to respond to in some way. They come under various categories. You saw a slide at the beginning, but it may not have been very clearly readable. So just to run through the categories, the first one really is the facilities management category. And the concern we got from quite a lot of churches that there are a very limited number of people with the suitable knowledge or perhaps even interest to be able to properly manage the maintenance and all of the regulatory requirements associated with running a public building. The synods have a variety of advice, and it does vary a bit. And as a forum, we've been talking about ways in which we can combine all of that advice that's available to form some checklists and links to other more detailed advice sources. And there'll perhaps be more on that when we can start that process working. But it is very much a building specific issue as well. And so churches do need to talk to somebody at the synod, particularly if they have a historic building. The next category is a very broad one, which we've titled Unsuitable Buildings, which probably you might recognise. It's probably the most significant issue facing URC church buildings, particularly the buildings that we've inherited. We heard of a wide variety of mismatches between church families, the size, their needs, their vision, and the buildings they occupy, the mismatch between them and their buildings, particularly where they were buildings inherited and shaped by past generations. And not surprisingly, the worship space and the way we use it was probably the focus of those concerns. We have been trying to focus as a forum on offering advice around the messages that buildings send out, the way that buildings facilitate or perhaps hinder the work of the church, and probably importantly, the way the building unconsciously shapes us and the way we see ourselves. We hope to update the information on the website, but again today, this is the focus issue for our presentation. So much more on that as we go through. The question over funding was a concern raised by some people, and how we actually find sources to adequately fund projects which don't start from the compromised position of being short of cash and therefore limiting ideas. This is very much a local synod issue in that they will know the best way of finding funding. But we do encourage churches and synods to develop long-term plans for their buildings, which will assist them in shaping the way they carry out projects and therefore making the most of funding that's available. Probably our last category was just the roles of synods and the forum. Obviously the forum is limited in the advice it can offer in particular situations, but again, there does seem a little bit of a hint of a disconnect in some places, and we would encourage a church synod partnering to try and work through some of these issues that have been raised as concerns. And probably lastly, we're very keen to hear from you, both following this conference and others, and particularly stories with pictures that we can put on the website that can be shared with other people. And perhaps lastly, if there are any real topics of concern that you have, let us know so that we can look at perhaps introducing them at later conferences. So that's our sort of update on where we got to from last time, and I'll hand back to Francis.
Thank you very much, Cliff. That's really helpful. And if you've got any questions about this, then just pop them in the chat and we can actually make sure that we pick that up and we can connect with you over those. Without further ado, I am now handing over to Martin Hayward to provide our keynote presentation on asset or liability. Martin is Mission Development Officer for Southern Synod, has been in this role for quite a few years and has been dealing with, well, I would say a wealth of questions and issues around developing buildings for mission and all the questions that they throw up. So I doubt very much that there is a question that he wouldn't have heard, and I'm sure we have a lot to learn from Martin. Martin, thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Francis, and thank you, Clifford, as well. Obviously, we listened to your feedback, and some of or a lot of what came up in last time that Clifford has mentioned. Hopefully, you'll find some of those answers, or at least food for thought as we go through, looking at asset or liability of our church buildings. Don't know what it's like where you are, but it's extremely hot where I am. I think we're going to reach 30 today. So hopefully in the lightheartedness of some of the slides that come up will also be something of deep and meaningful and something for us to take seriously on as we go forward in our mission with our churches and our synods. 3 factors to engage with God's mission. Can you all see this slide? If people just wave, if they can see it, that's fine. And also you can hear me, that would help as well, wouldn't it? That's good. 3 factors to engage with God's missions. First, of course, is people. Rich resource of diversity in gifts, but we also know there's sometimes a downside. Freeze bears in transience, and a mismatch of gifts brings exhaustion, leading to corporate depression is something that I find. We should be wary when people say, well, if there's nobody else to do it, I'll do it. Because that could be a sign that maybe God's telling you that you don't want to do that thing that's being suggested. The other one is buildings. Of course, what we're here for. Freehold and flexibility. Somebody says, well, what if it's a listed building or not? I have heard, I haven't checked this out, but I have heard that St. James Piccadilly, which is a grade 1 listed Wren building, has actually solar panels on its roof. So if that can get away with it, I'm sure where there's a will, there's a way. But also they're expensive to maintain and inappropriate sometimes to our needs. The third aspect is the Holy Spirit, and of course, unlike the two above, will never let you down. So as I go around and with mission, and some of you I notice who have come into the this conference are also my fellow mission enablers, the biggest flaw that we sometimes come across is at the what. Most churches, the starting point is, what do we need to do to keep going? And although people are very rational, and our committees are also very rational and have got a great deal to be said for a committee structure rather than just individuals going off on a bright idea, they do sometimes have downsides. And sometimes, sooner or later, the issue of deployment comes round. And we start thinking upon these logical lines: decline in membership outstripped by decline in church buildings. So therefore, we have an idea that in the back of our mind that maybe if we have 1-to-1 ratio, add up the ministers and you have the number of churches you need. Well, the same thing with membership as well. All, of course, seem rather daft when you speak to people 1-to-1. But how many times have you sat in a committee where the issue, the thorny issue of deployment comes up, and we start pulling our hairs out of how to square that circle? There's also another urban myth that I want to explore a little bit later on with us, and that is better to keep large churches going. It's cost effective. I'll come on to that a little bit later on. So the key, I think, is discovering our why. That's what we need to be engaged in. We have the right place, but the wrong building. That sometimes I've heard said. Well, then we may need to rebuild. Sometimes we have the wrong building and in the wrong place. Well, that's simple. You sell it. And the third one, we have the right building in the wrong place. Well, you probably have the wrong vision. All these things come back to that question about the why. Why are we doing things in those places? And as I mentioned earlier on, about size is a red herring. So sadly, I either sit in committees or, that's not the sad bit, by the way, it's what I hear, or I hear churches about talking about how to solve this problem. And one of them, of course, is, do we have too many buildings? So then I come across churches, forgive me if there's anybody called Angus or Gavin, but bear with me for a moment. What do we need to do to keep going? And this is a sort of scenario that sometimes can be promoted. Both churches have a membership of 20. One has an organist and no treasurer. The other one has a treasurer but no organist. Both are spending 20k on repairs to their buildings. The history of St. Agnes is that there's a 10% decline year on year, and for St. Gavin's, it's actually 5% decline each year. So they combine and become Union Church. Mind you, if anybody's been through this process of trying to combine churches, my guess is, or the thing is, you take a long time discussing what you're supposed to call it. And then some bright spark from the eldership of St. Agnes suggested, well, why don't we take the word saint from St. Gavin and Agnes from our title of St. Agnes, and then we have the name of the church. So part of the problem when you're combining two churches, and I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't happen, and there are some places where it's worked brilliantly, part of the problem is that there's a lot of internal looking rather than externally looking. But this is what happens, apparent growth, and it's only apparent. Membership becomes 30. It looks like it's a 50% increase. Part of that decline will be those who voted against it and feel by principle that they could not actually turn up. Others will suddenly realize that they're passing 3 Methodist churches, 1 Baptist and 2 Anglican churches on the way to go to the new church, and therefore will reconsider their discipleship and move to another church. You do have an organist and also a treasurer now. That's good. You're saving 20k, but outlook, decline. Why should it be any different? The issues have not really been addressed. The only issue that's been addressed is the what rather than the why. I didn't want to be outdone by the General Secretary who last time quoted Winston Churchill, which was a brilliant quote, and I nicked it for a meeting I had the following day. But there you are. There's a picture of St Agnes and St Gavin's for you. So the starting point is the why. Why has God called us to where we are? Each individual fellowship should ask that question. In Southern Synod that I cover, and in the town that I particularly live in, there's 4 URC churches. One is actually, I think, less than a mile apart, but both are very different in their style and in the communities that they serve, and both serve different communities. We have been given resources, as I said earlier on, people, buildings, and God is with us. And we may need to redirect some to fulfill God's command. Having 2 or 3 buildings diverting energy away from God and God's mission is counterproductive. And therefore it may need to sell buildings and, or actually maybe not sell them, maybe lease them out. But anyway, they're resources and an investment. It is sad to see 3 struggling churches where the inevitable is that 1 or 2 of them will close, but the end result is all 3 close. Redirecting the resources either through selling or leasing and making available the finances for buildings to fulfill the vision. Of course, it is a very obvious thing to say in some ways, but get 3 people from 3 different churches and say one of your buildings has got to close, everybody will probably point to the other church that needs closing. But buildings are important, and they are important for mission as well. Churches create a psychological presence. They are there, they are a presence in our communities. Badly looked after churches can do more damage than good. I've been to a number of church meetings, and you get stuck on the motorway and I think I'm late for a meeting, and I turn up at the building even during the daytime or night, and it looks as if it's closed. It looks like it's going to be up for sale, actually. So I think, oh dear, I've really let them down. They've all gone home, only to find I was one of the first to arrive. So badly looked churches can do damage more than good. Cared for churches, inside and out, can show we are committed to the locality. One of the other sad things I find as well is when people or churches spend a lot of money doing up their churches and a nice cafe area because they see that that is a good way of engaging in the local community, but has spent nothing on the area where they worship in. What signal does that send when you have a very nice up-to-date coffee machine, but you've still got carpet tiles on the floor of the church that are stained, and the place just looks like it's ready to close? Here's, I'd like to give 2 stories of 2 different churches. One is in Brentwood. I heard this on the London news because I come from southeast London, and it was about a church in Brentwood. Now, this church was redundant, 17th century church, All Saints. And what happened, as you can see by the picture there, if you look closely, that's a police officer. He's wearing gloves because of needles that were found there. During lockdown, a rave took place. There's no toilets or anything there, so there's lots of needles, some drugs were taken, and people used certain parts of it as a lavatory. So they had to bust this raid. This, of course, left a problem for the church. They needed £2,000 for a clean-up. And so a former church warden, who's still connected to the church, just tried to do some crowdfunding from the local community. What happened is that in a few days, they raised £20,000, money used to clean up, but also they can now open up the place as a storage and an outlet for food bank. So God has a plan. but what a story, really. Something that was derelict could be used as a way of showing God's love. Another one, this is in Southern Synod. It's down near the coast in Sedlescombe, which is just outside Hastings. This little chapel you can see here. It started with one in the congregation. A tree landed on the roof. That was good news, actually. I'll tell you why later. Manse, adjacent, was uninhabitable. Investment in people. A couple moved into the manse after renovating it. God sent them. They'd actually emigrated or retired to Spain and spent their time doing up an old farmhouse and land around it. And the skills that they learned in the process of doing that when they moved back to the UK was very helpful, because this chapel is built on the sides of the manse. So they redid the manse. The tree fell on the roof, which was actually a real act of God, because then we got a lot of money from the insurance, which paid for the redevelopment, not only repair the roof, but also some of the interiors of the building. The couple that moved into the manse became the local church leaders. And after a while, they rebuilt the chapel, as I said. Now they have 12 in the congregation, and it's lay-led. And of course, that's 1,200% growth. Wouldn't we all like that percentage growth in our churches? Now, just to say something about some things that would be counterintuitive for God's mission. Small congregations, and this is what I want to come back to the point about thinking, should we only look after or focus on large churches? Small congregations are tenacious. Intimacy is attractive in an impersonal society. We have, and statistics have shown this, one of the countries has a large number of people who feel lonely, who feel disconnected and isolated. And I believe it's our network of our smaller churches that actually can offer this attractiveness, because we can offer something that is personal in an impersonal society. They also will probably remain on a small side. I have one church that's has always been growing. It's grown tremendously, but it has never really got above 20 people. People come, people go for good reasons, but it has always remained active and lively, but also has given a great deal of personal contact for people. We should also remember, and this is also borne out by not only experience, but also research, sometimes it's easier to plant new churches than it is to reinvigorate established churches. I won't go into too much detail about that, but sometimes it is a lot easier, morale-wise as well, plus you're not fighting against, well, we've always done it this way. So when we're considering buildings and actually selling off some of our buildings if need be, maybe we should also think about purchasing of new buildings. There is a URC mission project, and Southern Synod have just started a pilot system of using mission projects, as it says there, using church buildings which have previously been sold to set up missional communities. And those of you who are familiar with fresh expressions will recognize that expression, missional communities. And the reason of starting up these mission projects in Southern Synod, as I say, it's a pilot. We've got no idea if it's going to work. We're just stepping out in faith. We want to try and target people's forming church around those we reach, rather than asking them to come to us.
We now have about 10 minutes, a little bit less, to bring some of the questions that you might have from your groups, or that you might just have yourself from what you've heard from the presentation that Martin has given.
There's
a
comment and one question. One question I don't know the answer to is, how many churches has the URC planted in the last 10 years? Does anyone know the answer to that question?
I saw that question too, and I think it was Martin Ashford who asked that question. Hello, Martin. I don't know that we don't necessarily have that information to hand, but we can go back and look at what the number of new churches that we've had in recent years. They will not all be church plants, so it depends a little bit on local knowledge to find out which are which. I personally know only of one that is a very deliberate church plant, which is in Martin's Synod, but we have certainly had quite a few mission projects join and be officially received at the assembly in recent years. And we can certainly try to get as accurate information as we can for you if you would like. As Steve says, they're always reported at assembly, and Eastern Synod has also had a couple within the last 2 years. So we can gather that information. There is a question here, I think, from Naomi. How do we get beyond the "we can't change that, it's always been that way, and someone donated it" mentality? Oh, the bells that are ringing. I can see them on the screen. Martin, how do we do that?
Yes, the donation things can be a bit tricky, but if it was a gift given to the church, it belongs to the church. That's one thing I'll say. The other thing I would say is that when I first started in this role about 20 years ago, I read up all about change management and all the files, and I was very pleased with myself going around to churches telling them about the importance of change and change management. It was a total waste of time, and change management, I think, is because of this, everybody intellectually knows they need to change. Emotionally, that's very different. What change is about is more about bereavement. So look upon it as about bereavement. So you're going to get bargaining come through when there's going to be change. Because it's when you're leaving something behind and going to something else, you've got to put it down and move on. And that can be very difficult. So when you're dealing with people in that situation, and I know it's not a perfect answer, I'm just trying to help you. Don't get frustrated when you've explained it time and time again of why you've got to do something. It's good to do it once or twice, but it's because you're up against this this bereavement process. So yeah, that's my shortest answer for that one.
Martin, there are a few other questions coming in, and thank you for that answer. And as we say, whatever questions we can't deal with, we can come back to at the next conference, but we can also gather up information and send that to you. Now, there are a few questions here, and I'm going to pick some out, and hopefully we can answer some of the others in the process of that. A question from Tim Clark. He says there is a place for re-church planting, reseeding, maybe through mission projects. If serving in community, how important is it that there is some sort of worshipping present, or for it to be the goal? Martin, I would like you to comment on that, but maybe you can also, because you used both terms, church plant, I think, and mission project. Can you also define these terms?
The first thing is about worship involvement. It's paramount, absolutely. One of the things that when I go around to churches, you haven't done it for ages really, but done the sort of workshops on, we're a spiritual centre, not a social centre. People, when they come to your church, if they're from outside, expect a spiritual experience. That's why they're coming. We're entering an era where people are searching for spiritual realities. If they're not searching for spiritual realities, they won't come to you. So if they've actually come, they're expecting a spiritual dimension. So I would say it's hugely important. Prayer is important. Worship is important. However, style that is done should be underpinning it, even if it's quiet, sort of surreptitious, you know, there's a prayer group that's praying for this mission. It doesn't have to be in people's faces, but it actually has to be the core there. As a mission enabler, I'm only interested in seeing churches grow and churches being planted. I'm not particularly interested about social centres being planted. Great when they happen, but that's not the driver. Church plant. Sorry?
On you go. Sorry, I thought you were finished, but you hadn't.
No. I'm not a politician, you know. I don't just answer the question I want to answer. Church plant, there's sort of reseeding, if you like. You go into a church, you replant a church within inside a church. That's one way of doing it. You can do it that way. That can be sometimes successful. Or there's the classical, more church plant, where you go to the community area, you pray around the area, you find somewhere to hire out, and you use that as a place of worship. And so there's different styles there. There's also things like messy church, forest church. There's huge numbers, but I'd say there's usually the two patterns. One is you're actually engaging very much where the community is, so you go really where they are. The other one is you say, well, we've got a good building, haven't got a congregation, or it's not working, so we replant in that congregation, either by using people from another congregation to set up a small group. That's more difficult. It needs more negotiation of how you do that than actually the one where you're just going fresh in. And that's one of the reasons I said that it's sometimes easier to church plant. What I meant was without a building or without something new, rather than with an existing congregation. Mission projects, I'm just conscious of the time. Basically, some years ago, General Assembly set up the idea that churches could start off a mission project. So they come under the auspices of the United Reformed Church. I'm going to guess, I don't think they have church numbers, and they can be specifically for a piece of action. One that I do know about, I think, was Lindisfarne, the Holy Island, that started off as a mission project, for example. But I'll say more in the thing after 1 o'clock.
Okay, Martin, we are nearly at the time for group questions for this plenary questions, but I wanted to just quickly pick up one more question, and I do apologize to the one or two people who did not get a chance for the question to be asked, because I think a real big question is, especially now that we're coming out of lockdown and so many churches have actually managed to continue their worship and their fellowship in one way or another without buildings. And so Richard not quite rightly asks the question, do we really need buildings at all, if it is about the why question? You know, should we, you know, rather than assuming buildings that we own are always needed or positive?
Buildings are not always needed. They're a resource. The final comment says buildings at all. I would say don't like the at all, because they are actually a psychological presence, you know, even the building inside the community you serve. How you use those buildings and how many we need is another question. You know, if you've got a lot of people, so maybe now have gone to care homes or in you know, nursing homes who can access online stuff, then you keep your online stuff going. It's extremely important that you should. But each church needs to find their why. Why are they there for? And if it's a small chapel that's on a hill that hasn't got any parking facilities, maybe you should find funding to create it into a studio so you can broadcast your services to a wider community. Who knows?
We're now going to show you two videos, one straight after the other. They're both from Wooler, which is a rural town in the heart of Northumberland. The first video is presented by Jane Pannell from Wooler URC about how they altered a room in their church for wider community use. The second video is about the Glendale Gateway Trust, where Patrick Sheard, an elder at Wooler URC, is the chair of trustees. And that video is shown courtesy of the locality organization, who recorded it for their national conference. Now, at the beginning of this webinar, I asked you to have a piece of paper and your pens ready. And I'd like to ask you to take a piece of paper in front of you and to divide your page into 3 sections. So 3 columns, so vertically. In the first column, please put an exclamation mark at the top. And as you watch the videos, write down anything that surprises you about what you see and write that in that column. At the top of the second column, please put down a question mark and write down in that column anything you'd like to ask or know more about. And then in the third column, put an arrow and jot down any practical ideas for your context or church that the videos stimulate. So an exclamation mark about anything that surprises you, a question mark about anything you'd like to ask, and an arrow for any practical ideas. Following the videos, you'll be able to go into small breakout groups again to discuss your responses to the Wooler videos. Well, Simon, without any further ado, can we run the videos, please?
Welcome to Wooler Warm Hub. This amazing space used to be dark, brown, damp, cold, poorly lit, and it was the former Sunday school room for the URC church, which is just through there. And out there was a very poorly equipped and single-skinned kitchen, which was in Arctic conditions for much of the year because of the cold, lack of heating. And in between was the heritage loo. The loo was famous and heritage because it had one of those wonderful corner wash hand basins that's blue and white print ceramics. Unfortunately, it was also cracked and it leaked. And this space was used by largely church activities. So the choir practiced here, and after worship on a Sunday, then people would come back here and have coffee, but not for long because of the cold and the dark conditions. So what you now see here is a fully disabled access space. It's properly heated, lit, carpeted. There's a coffee bar, and the kitchen is fully equipped and insulated. There are 2 loos, and one of them has wheelchair capacity. There's a good quality audio visual system that stands alone for this room. Access to the church was pretty difficult. There are some precarious outside steps. You had to hang on to the door as you were coming in. And then a further flight of steps within the church to get to the worship space. So through the considered removal of a relatively short piece of fretwork, woodwork, and with the help of a very inspired carpenter, we managed to put in a disabled access, which leads a proper ramp, which leads to the worship space and leads to the warm hub as well. So what's been the key to success? And I think there are 3 related reasons for Wooler Warm Hub being such a success. First thing is culture change. There was, when we were first looking at what might be done here, some reluctance to engage in finding significant grant sums to do the kind of fundamental work that needed to be done. There's almost a feeling that this church didn't deserve it and it wasn't worth it and it wouldn't be successful, so why bother trying? So we did some early wins on quite small sums of money, just to show that there was enthusiasm out there and people would be able to And it was to raise aspirations, really, to engender a belief that the scheme had some viability to it. And we created a multi-agency steering group, so people from a range of other agencies, as well as the church, and that helped to reinforce the message that A, shy bairns get out, and B, there was a deserving plan, which would have significant impact on the church and on the community outside. Second reason was, I think, seeking and achieving multiple sources of support and funding. So we actually got help in funding or in kind from 9 different sources. And so we were able to bring everything together. We used synod capacity in terms of planning, and we maximised usage of the HMRC provisions such as reclaiming VAT. It was working smartly. And the third reason comes back to that multi-agency partnership approach. Small group of elders, representatives from the local rural community council, and a voluntary forum met to progress and manage the scheme. And we did some troubleshooting, we did some design work, we did some funding shortfall filling. So we used as many local resources as we could as well. So we had a local architect, we had a builder, we had a plumber, we had a carpenter joiner, we had plumbers, we had building control officers on board, we had funders and donors, and we got everybody together so that it was, and we kept reporting on that too. So it became a multifaceted group of people working together. So how do we measure success? Well, the Wool Warm Hub has become the venue of choice for a whole range of activities and groups. Some connected with the church, some ecumenical and some not. So provided COVID allows us to, we have a fortnightly partnership film club. We have a monthly men's coffee morning, a weekly over 50s youth club, regular soup, roll and cake lunches, choir practice, an ecumenical Bible study group, and more. And in planning and in preparation, we're also looking to a ukulele group using this to rehearse, daycare provision for some of our older folk. A digital inclusion scheme is looking for a friendly space to meet, and a mutual support bereavement group. So those are just some of the schemes that are emerging essentially out of the pandemic and will be using the Wool Warm Hub as their place. So I think that the range of activities is evidence that we needed this resource in Wooler and its hinterland. It's warm, it's comfortable, and it's welcoming space that can be used by a whole range of different people. And what happened to the after worship coffee morning? Well, it runs the risk of becoming the after worship coffee afternoon because many more people stay longer. This amazing space is the result of amazing partnership and cooperation. Warm Hub. This amazing space, brown, damp, cold.
If we go back to the origins of the Glendale Gateway Trust, it was established at a time when it was recognised that there were particular challenges for rural communities, and those challenges included things like employment, housing provision, and generally community welfare.
There was a cry for energy, I think, in the town. There was a cry for something to be done, but there wasn't an obvious body. There wasn't an obvious organisation that would move things forward.
The trust nourishes something that is largely lost. People are always talking about community, but for me, it's the glue that holds people together. It's in Wooler, with us being a smallish community, you get a sense of belonging, and because of the nature of the trust and how it facilitates so many community projects, from the food bank, social housing, it's involved with all that. It sort of does, we do have a feeling of togetherness.
One of the main challenges we've had as an organisation is early on with sustaining ourselves. We had very good support from the local authority and the Regional Development Agency as it was, and in 2009 we were really quite nervous about what the future held. That said, we had really taken on board what the locality were telling us, that we needed to develop assets and an income stream, and we worked very closely to do that. So in 2009 we had a large portion of our income was coming from our assets, and we knew we just needed to increase that.
The Glendale community is really strong, and that's really apparent in the lots of things that happen throughout the year, such as the Glendale Festival, the Glendale Agricultural Society show. There's a lot really happens here, and it's a positive space to live in. The Cheviot Centre works really well for us. We see it as a hub, so that's a bringing together of several services. We've got Newcastle Buildings Society, the library, the tourist information. Wooler Police Station are based here now as well. And we have several people who rent offices from us as well. Then we have the community spaces. So we have 2 halls, which we rent out to people who might have an exercise class or a meeting or a business breakfast.
An area like ours in a deep rural location is so dependent on micro enterprises, micro businesses, and we've done what we can to try and support and encourage and enable people to start those micro enterprises. We have a number of office spaces here at the Cheviot Centre. They're very popular. One of the reasons I'm convinced it's so successful is because it's such a nice environment to work in. We have offices in the main building, we have office pods, and there's just a nice community feeling about it, a nice atmosphere in the building.
Housing is certainly an issue. Accommodation is an issue for people. So there needs to be accommodation that's affordable at every level.
We became a registered provider of social housing. We did that in 2011. And that gave us access to additional funding from the Homes and Communities Agency. We were able to develop more housing. We were able to develop our income stream. So it's put us in a fairly secure position.
The Trust has, over a number of years, taken over redundant properties, brought them into usage, refurbished them to a good standard, which has provided commercial opportunities for the High Street and living accommodation on the High Street as well, all of which returns a sense of life to a High Street that would otherwise be struggling. I think we also need access to our services. There is a trend, a drift, for services to become ever more centralised on larger towns and larger communities. No good for people living here in rural communities. They need to have access to services easily and readily without huge travelling complications or huge expense.
If the RVS service didn't exist, our clients would be at home. They wouldn't have the place of safety to come to that they like and share with friends and like-minded people. We have a wide age range from 60 through to 90. They do love it so much that every time there's been a change, they worry that the RVS is not going to be still here for them. So yeah, it's heartwarming, it really is.
One of the things we've always said is we don't want to start activities and then have to stop them because they're not sustainable. And that overarching principle is the same for the Trust as a whole. We're here for the long haul. We're not an organisation that wants to disappear.
I think people expect voluntary community sector organisations to be delivering services and doing everything for nothing. And you can't, you simply can't. So we've tried to find that right balance in developing projects which fulfill a social need, but at the same time bring us in an income. So the community-led housing, the business units, the Achieve It Centre. That's been our biggest challenge.
For me, the power of community means knowing that you're part of the community. If we ever have any problems or we have questions, that we can quite easily go to other partners in the community, to our friends, and ask, and we know there's going to be help there. If we were in times of trouble or in need, we know that we can go and ask, and there'll be somebody there to help us, and likewise we'd be there to help them.
We work with each other, we work with the Glendale Trust. If we've got challenges as well, they usually know somebody that may be able to support us or signpost us as well. So there's the big thing about community for us is the fact that you've got the well-being, connections, and the spiritual guidance as well. It's lovely, it is.
One of the things that we undervalue as a society is how much we can do when we all pull together in the same direction. And I think the power of community harnesses that. If we can work together to find a joint vision, a joint desire, a joint direction for our community, then the things that can be achieved are almost boundless.
What makes this community, this Glendale Gateway Trust, unique, in my opinion, it's the lack of ego that makes this place run. There's no me and mine in this, it's ours. That sense of belonging, to me, that is what community is about.
Power of community is extremely important. I think if we didn't have people behind us, if we didn't have supporters, if we didn't have good trustees, we could never have achieved what we've done. Trying to achieve consensus in a small place like this is really quite difficult. But I think if you can demonstrate that you're straightforward and your intentions are good, and you've got the community at heart, then I think you can get people on board and get people behind you and make things happen.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Steve Summers from Northampton, sunny Northampton, development worker for church-related community work, a bit of a clue there, and also special category ministry. Hope you appreciated those videos. Great thanks to Jane and Patrick for talking. Patrick was the guy in the blue jumper that started off as the elder from Wooler URC. Hopefully it sparked your imagination in some ways about what can happen when you listen well to those around you, local community groups, neighbours. What happens when you look around for prospective partners outside your church, and obviously then build and develop those networks and partnerships. And it's about putting faith into action with the guide of the Holy Spirit, walking the way in our own context, neighbourhoods and communities.
One of the comments in my group was the URC website should have more films like this on the website for us to access, and that's certainly a point I'm taking away with me. If you've got questions from your groups that you'd like to pose to the Buildings Forum, then please do email them. Do email them to Carol, and Carol will pass them on to the members of the forum. We're going to draw this plenary part of this main part of the webinar to a close. And before we do that, I first of all want to make you aware that there is going to be a next Building Forum webinar, and that's going to take place on the 14th of October. That's a Thursday evening, the 14th of October, from 7 till 8:30 in the evening. And the focus of that will be on environmental issues and church buildings. So we're hoping to bring in people behind Eco Church and Eco Congregation, Green Apostles, etc., etc. I even see someone here from a synod that's got a special award, so we might bring them in too. And really, if that's something that's, well, it's a massive issue for all of us. So I would really encourage you to join us again. But for now, this is formally the end of our webinar. So thank you again. God bless you in all that you do, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, and bye-bye.